The latest version of the MongoDB driver for .NET does not yet support link. That's coming in 2.1. So the 2.0 driver doesn't have that. So when I was updating the identity provider for MongoDB to ASP.NET, I was not able to implement the IQueryableUserStore and IQueryableRoleStore that I had implemented in the past. So the example project, the sample that depends upon this, does not work when you try and use the roles and user properties on the role manager and user manager respectively. So you get an exception at runtime. I just want to walk through that and kind of explain my rationale for why I don't think this is really that big of a deal and how I patched over the sample project. And I think this is a great opportunity to kind of talk about the line between what the provider does, the identity provider does and should do for you or can do for you in a project, and where you can kind of leave it behind and just go to MongoDB directly, even though you're still working with users and roles. And in my opinion, I don't think there's anything wrong with just going directly to MongoDB when you have use cases beyond what the abstractions and the identity framework provide for you. So just to understand what doesn't work, I'm going to hop over to the driver. And I'm just going to point out the user store is what's implemented in the MongoDB identity provider. And it's a wrapper around a ton of interfaces that are part of the ASP.NET Identity Framework. And two of those, IQueryableRoleStore and IQueryableUserStore, we can't implement because there's no link abstraction in the latest MongoDB provider for .NET. That's coming soon in the 2.1 driver, but it's not in the 2.0 driver. I went ahead and updated anyways, though. There's a lot of interest in this, and I really don't feel like these abstractions are even necessary. All these two interfaces provide are just literally a wrapper around returning an iQueryable interface. What do I mean by that? Well, let's hop over and look at how they're used in the sample project. So in a couple of places in the sample project, for example, when we get a list of users, actually, let's take a look at what that looks like. Let's run the application and see what the sample looks like. All right, so when the sample loads up, there's a user's admin if you're logged in as an administrative user. And when we run this, it blows up because the provider, the MongoDB provider I've created, doesn't implement the IQueryableUserStore. We can't do that because there's no link abstraction. So let's hop over to the code then and take a look at this and see what we can do instead. So right now this sample is built on the user manager abstraction, which has a users property. And if we just dive into the implementation of that, we can see what's going on here. So what this tries to do is get our user store and cast it safely as an IQueryableUserStore. But if that returns null, in the case where that's not an interface that's implemented, it will throw the not supported exception that we're getting when we run the application. So obviously this won't work because we haven't implemented the iQueryable interface, and I don't see that happening anytime soon for two reasons. First of which, it's obviously not even available in the MongoDB driver. Second of which, I really don't feel this is necessary. I don't think that this abstraction is providing anything of value. All it literally does is goes to MongoDB, the MongoDB driver for you, and returns back an iQueryable wrapper around your MongoDB collections. I don't feel like there's any value in what this is doing for you. There's no logic in here. Instead, what you can do is just go directly to the MongoDB APIs and query your users directly. And also, there's a roles property on the role manager that's part of the IQueryableRoleStore that does exactly the same thing with roles. And again, I feel like you can just go directly and query roles from MongoDB. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So in this sample project, I set up an application identity context, just mirroring the sample that exists. I don't know if I would actually use this in reality, but it does serve as a nice little place to stuff away, creating a Mongo client instance to connect to a MongoDB server, and then grabbing our database and basically making two calls to get collection interfaces to our users and roles collections in our MongoDB database. So there's not much going on here with this application identity context. The nice thing is it's some plumbing code that you can sweep away under the rug and then reuse. So what we can do then is we can just go directly to these Mongo collection instances and get all of our roles and get all of our users. We don't need to use a user manager and a role manager abstraction. They're not adding anything here. Now, this application identity context is already available. It's actually injected into the container that's running as a part of this example. So what we can do to get access to it, just like we get access to the user manager and role manager here as properties that just basically go to our container and grab an instance of application role manager and user manager, we can just do the same thing and grab an instance of the application identity context and use it directly. So we can just take a copy of this and paste it. And for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to get rid of the private property. I'm not doing any testing where I'm injecting this. So I'll just get rid of the ability to set it. All we'll do is have a get property, basically a read-only property, and we'll get an instance of application identity context. And let's just call it identity context. Just like that. Then all we have to do is grab an instance of it and return that back. So now we can just go directly to our identity context, which remember has a roles and users Mongo collection instances available to us. We can go right there and get access to our roles and users. So again, then this exception we're getting, we can go to that line of code then on line 57. Except I made some changes, so it's a little further down here. And instead of calling user manager.users, which is going to blow up, we can instead come in here and access our users, and we can query directly to our identity, or via our identity context. We can go and grab our users collection, and we can just build up a query using the new MongoDB interfaces, asynchronous interfaces, and one of those is a find method. And ReSharper's being a little picky here today. So what I'm going to do is just go to the top here and add the namespaces directly. So MongoDB.driver, and I need, MongoDB.driver is all I need. So I'll go back down to the line of code I'm working on. Now, basically this find method, there's a bunch of ways you can query this, one of which is just passing a predicate. So I'll just pass a predicate that returns true to basically not filter anything, so to return all of our users, and then use the toList async method that's part of the MongoDB driver. And then I need to await the result of that so that I can then pass it to my view. So just like that, I can now go directly to MongoDB to get all the users. I don't need to use the indirection of the user manager to do this. I can build this then. And then I can rerun this. I'll close the window that's open. I'll just rerun the user's admin page. I should get my list of users back here. Voila. So we can just go directly to MongoDB to get access to our users. Same thing with roles. And there are a couple of other places where we are querying all users and roles, so we'll need to update those as well. So we'll stop the application, and we'll look for all user access to users.toList. I'll look for that to see if there's any other instances. Here's another spot, so I'll go ahead and copy this so that I can paste it back there. Jump to this location, and then I can paste this in here. This is on the roles admin controller though, so I also need to grab that property I added, which resolves an instance of my application identity context, and bring this to this controller as well. I'll just paste this in here at the top. And then we can go back down to the line of code we were working on below, where we are building up, where we're querying all the users again, except that's not quite what we're doing here. We do start out with all the users, but then look at what's going on here. The example starts out grabbing all the users in toList to bring them all into memory, and then it turns right around, and for each user, so this is an n+1, it goes back and asks the user manager if the user's in a given role, because this particular method is looking for all the users in a given role. So in this situation, this is a great example why we should just go directly to MongoDB, because we don't need this select n+1. We don't need this select n+1 to see if a user's in a role. We could actually just do this from this predicate here. We could say, hey, MongoDB, if our user, and we look at its roles, except we also need to import the interface for that find method, or sorry, the namespace for that find method, MongoDB.driver. And then we go back down here. so what we can do is we can say, hey, MongoDB, if our user has the role, and we pass to it the role.name, the same role we're checking for right here. If our user has that role, we want to return it. So we don't need all of this additional loop with all these n+1 calls to see if the user has a given role. And we don't need to build up a list then. And honestly, that comment's kind of redundant. Basically, we have our users and our role. We could even call this users and role if we want to be specific and help document our code a little bit. And maybe we even break a line here and put our predicate on the separate line. Now we've got this nice query to MongoDB that will find all the users in a given role. And this is why it's a good idea to go to the MongoDB provider directly. That abstraction doesn't provide what you need, and then you're off doing this n+1, which is ridiculous to even have an example. So there's another case of that. We can build that, and if we want to see that working, we can run our application. And then we can go to the roles admin. Oh, and then that throws an exception because we have another place we need to patch up, and that's querying all the roles from the role manager. Again, that's using the IQueryableRoleStore, which we don't have implemented, so we can patch that up. Again, in this case, we want to get all of our roles, and we'll do that by going to our identity context directly, grabbing our roles collection, and again, we'll call find. This time, again, passing a predicate of true, so we get all roles, and toList async to bring a list of those back. And then we need to pass those to our view, and this is also asynchronous, so we need to await the result, and we need to turn this method into an asynchronous method. All right, that's patched up now. We can run our application again. And I'll refresh my roles admin request to get all the roles back, and now the list of roles works. And then inside of here, this details view, that's when we were patching up to query users by role. Again, that's why it's a good idea to go directly to MongoDB so we can do that additional querying instead of needing to do an n+1 lookup via the role manager or user manager to see what users are in a role. And then there are a few other spots where we go ahead and use all the roles. Now, I'm not going to sit here and code all of that up. Instead, what I'll do is I'll stop and show you the final result and explain why I made some of the decisions I made. So here is actually the commit I wrapped up with for this change to the sample project. So let's just step through what I did here and show you kind of the decisions I made to make a final nice commit here to share with everybody. First thing, there were several spots where we are using the looking up all the roles. So what I did is on the application identity context, I made a little method that queries all the roles so we don't have to type this out every single time to do the predicate return true and toList async. This nice little method then is used in about 3 or 4 spots in the sample. On the roles admin controller, so the page to look up all the roles, again, we have access to an instance of our identity context, and then in a couple of places we patch things up. Here's that method we were just working on, the index page to get all roles, again, calling the all roles async. And then down below, we have the details page. Here's that query we patched up where we're searching for users in a given role. And then, oh, that's it for that one. And then the user admin controller, again, getting an instance of our application identity context. And then we use that to query all of our users. And then we also have a couple of places where this controller queries roles. When we're creating a user, I'll show this actually in the application running. Go to the users admin. When we create a new user, we need a list of roles here. So that's what this piece of code is doing here. So we get all the roles and add those to the view. Also, when we go ahead and click create, we need those roles if there was an error or success. I don't know what's all going on here, but there's like 3 spots where we're going to the role manager and getting all the roles. So I updated all those as well to use the all roles async. And then there's one last spot when actually editing a user. We also pull up all the roles to show those as well. So in all those places now, we're just going directly to the MongoDB provider to query users and roles. And we're using the MongoDB provider's method of querying documents from MongoDB. Once the link implementation is available, you could switch to that as well if you don't like using this predicate format. But the predicate format that exists in the driver already is very link-like, so I don't know that there's actually a reason to do that. Anyways, I thought it'd be fun to kind of share my rationale here and explain a little bit why I don't feel like it's necessary to implement the IQueryableUserStore and RoleStore, even once we have the link implementations. I probably add it just so people aren't tripped up, but I think that you can just go directly to MongoDB for some of this stuff. There's nothing wrong with that in my mind. I think it's actually a good use of MongoDB to take advantage of MongoDB and not always be working with an iQueryable interface.